All right, welcome. So today's Monday. I am obviously not here. I will not be here for the rest of the week. I had prepared a video for each day to let you know what's going on, but also found at my website will upload videos, not only what we did today, but videos of me working out each homework assignment, problem by problem. And so feel free to go look at those if you need any help and want to see how the homework is being worked out. If you also have any questions, you're feel free to walk across the hall with permission and go ask Miss McAdams if you have any questions. But I think for the most part you're going to do pretty well this week. This whole week we're going to focus on the quadratic formula, and so we have one topic for the whole week, so that's going to help. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is we really need to go back and review before we hit quadratic formula. We really need to talk about a quadratic equation. And so what I want to do is let's talk about a quadratic equation. So I have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is a quadratic equation written in standard form. Okay. It equals 0. That's going to be important later. Notice that I have a number in front of the x squared, a number in front of the x, and a number at the end. That's what the a, b, and c stand for. They stand for variables. And so this is any quadratic equation written in standard form looks like this. Let me give you a quick example. An example of a quadratic equation written in standard form would be something like, I don't know, 2x squared plus 5x minus 8 equals 0. So it's an equation. It has an equal sign. It's a quadratic. In this case, just so we understand what I'm talking about, the number in front of your a squared, that's your the number in front of your x squared, that's your a. In this case, a would equal 2. The number in front of your x is your b. So in this case, b would equal 5. And then finally, the number in that has no variable on it, we call that your constant. Your constant c is -8. And so just by replacing those values a, b, and c with any number, you can create an infinite amount of quadratic equations. So this is just an example of a quadratic equation. Okay? Alright, so we talked about that a lot last week, and we also talked about solving quadratic equations. And so one way we can solve quadratic equations is by factoring. For example, let's say I gave you this equation here. X squared plus 8x plus 12 equals 0. And I told you to solve this equation, solve this quadratic. Well, we would solve this, we would do it by factoring. That's what we did last week. So we factor that. And what we would end up doing is we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 12. But those same two numbers add to give me 8. And so in looking for those numbers, hopefully you realize that those two numbers are 6 and 2. Okay, so 6 times 2 is 12, 6 plus 2 is 8. And so that allows me to write this out in factored form. X plus 6, x plus 8 equals 0. So I rewrote this. And from here we're able to solve. So when we talked about solving this last week, what we talked about is to make this whole equation equal 0. Essentially all we have to do is we have to set or figure out the x value that lets each parentheses equal 0. So in other words, what would I plug in for x here that would turn this parentheses equal to 0? Well, that would be x equals -6. And then go over here, what would I plug in for x here to make this set of parentheses equals 0? And hopefully you see that would be x equals -8. And those are the two x values that, when plugged into this equation, makes the equation equal 0. Because essentially we talked about last week, by setting one of these parentheses equal to 0 and multiplying throughout, you end up turning the whole problem equal to 0. So these are your two answers. And that's a quick review of what we did last week. So we solve by factoring. Awesome. So pretty easy, definitely quick. Okay? So the question comes up, well, what happens if the equation I have is not factorable? How do I solve it? Well, that's what we're going to work on for this whole week. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's say I give you an equation, and that particular equation is not factorable. So I don't know, let's go with x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. Okay? So your first thought when you see this is you're probably thinking, oh, let's factor this. So you're going to say, okay, I'm going to factor this. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 2, but they add to give me 5. And you'll sit there and you'll think about it for a while, and you'll contemplate, you'll probably ask your neighbor, and you'll quickly realize that there are no two numbers that multiply to give you 2 and add to give you 5, no whole numbers. So we cannot factor this. Okay? So there has to be another method, another way to solve this equation to figure out what x values make this equation equal to 0. And there is another method, and that's what we're going to work on. So let's start talking about it. It is the quadratic formula. So the other method that we're going to be discussing this week, the method we're going to be spending all our time on, is the quadratic formula. Okay, so that is definitely really important. That is going to be the core of what we talk about for the next 5 days. Okay? Before I move forward, let me say this. Factoring works in some cases, not all cases. It only works in a few cases. So if the equation is factorable, you can factor it and you can find the solutions or the x-intercepts, what x equals, quick and easy. The quadratic formula works in all cases. You can use it for every quadratic equation. You can use it for the quadratic equation here that we factored. You can use it for quadratic equations that you can't factor. The quadratic formula will always work to find the solutions to any quadratic formula. But it comes at a cost. It's not quick and it's not easy. Well, it's kind of not easy. Once you get used to it, it actually is fairly easy, but it's definitely not quick. And so we're going to discuss this quadratic formula this week, so let's go ahead and get into it. The quadratic formula is, let's see, quadratic formula looks like this. X equals, so it starts off with x equals because, again, what we're looking for is the x values that make the equation equal to 0. We're looking for the x-intercepts, the solutions. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay? So let me put parentheses around this b here. That's going to be important later. So the quadratic formula, opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Good news, you don't have to memorize this. You don't have to memorize it. So just so we're aware, this formula is found on the EOCT formula sheet. And because it's found on the EOCT formula sheet, that allows me to be able to give it to you on any test and any quiz that we do in this class. So you do not have to memorize this formula. However, some of you may want to, and I promise you, if you go to YouTube and type in quadratic formula song, there are countless videos of people writing songs and doing silly things just to memorize this very popular formula. But again, I'm going to give you this formula on any quiz, any homework, any assignment, any test that we have in this course. This formula will be given to you, so you do not have to memorize it. Okay? But we do want to talk about how to use it. So let's go back to our original problem that we have. So we have this problem. We know we can't factor it. So how are we going to solve this? Well, we're going to use the quadratic formula. So let me write that down again. The quadratic formula is x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay? So it looks kind of difficult, but if you remember, if you go back and remember what I discussed earlier, the standard form for an equation looks like this, where a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is the constant. And so if we go to highlight that, we know that a is the number in front of x squared. So what number is in front of x squared here? Well, there's not one listed, but hopefully you recognize there's really a 1 there. Okay, so your a is going to be 1. Your b is going to be the number in front of x, so your b is going to be 5. And the c is going to be the constant, so the c is 2. And so if I write this down, okay, I'm going to write this down real quick. I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to say, write it down right here on the side. Well, yeah, so a equals 1, b equals 5, and c equals 2. Now that you have that information, all you really have to do is plug these in for a, b, and c. So this 1, this a, is going to be plugged in right here. And right here. This 5, well, that's b. That's going to be plugged in here and here. And then finally, your c, 2, is going to be plugged in right here. So after I plug all those things in, essentially what I'm going to have is something that looks like this. It's going to say x equals the opposite of b. So if b is 5, remember this negative sign, I'm not saying negative b, I'm saying opposite of b. That's important. So what is the opposite of b? If b is 5, then the opposite of b would be negative 5. Why didn't I just say negative? Well, that'll come in handy later, because if b was already negative, then the opposite would be positive. So again, opposite b, so it'd be negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so parentheses, b is 5, so 5 squared, minus 4 times a, well, a is 1, times c, c is 2, all over 2 times a. Well, a is 1. So again, don't try to make this any more complicated than what it is. All we are doing is taking our a, b, and c values we found in our equation and plugging them into our quadratic formula. I'm going to continue to highlight because I think highlighting helps. So our a was 1, so that went here and here. Our b was 5, so that went here and here. And our c was 2, and that went here. So now that you plug things into the quadratic equation, into the quadratic formula, now we have to solve. Well, that's where this guy comes in handy. This guy, your calculator, is, well, it's really nice because your calculator is going to allow you to simply plug this in just like it looks. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to turn it on. Okay, and so once you turn it on, we want to type this in. And so first button is you want to hit the fraction button. So hit the fraction button. And we're going to create the fraction, and then you're going to type in the top part of the fraction first. So it's going to be negative 5. And then when it comes to this plus or minus, some of y'all may be looking at this going, what in the world is this plus or minus? I have no clue what this is. I haven't seen that. Well, let me tell you what the plus and minus is really doing. The plus and minus is really telling us that this problem is actually 2 problems in one. What do I mean by that? Well, you have the plus problem, and then you have the minus problem. Okay? So let me show you what that looks like. So you have the plus version, which is where you have a plus in between. And then you would have another version where there's a minus in between. So that would look like this. Let me write this out, write it on a separate sheet of paper. So you have a plus and a minus. So essentially what happens is this problem becomes two separate problems. You have negative b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You have negative b minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so instead of writing it twice every time, we essentially write it like this. But know that that means we have two separate problems. One of them's going to have a plus, one of them's going to have a minus. So we're essentially going to type it in our calculator twice, and we'll get two different values out for x. So the first one I'm going to do plus. So as I'm typing in, I go negative 5 plus the square root. So hit second x squared, brings up the square root. Now everywhere I put parentheses, just put parentheses. So parentheses 5 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses 2. So I've typed everything in up top. Now I hit the down arrow and I'm going to type in 2 times 1 and I'm going to hit enter. And my calculator did all that work for me and I'm getting an answer. Okay? Now let's talk about this answer. The answer you get in your calculator looks like this. The square root of 17 minus 5 all over 2. That's the answer your calculator gives you. However, in this course, we're going to write it differently. The calculator gives you the answers backwards from what you're going to see everywhere else in mathematics. So instead of the square root coming first and the minus 5 coming second, we're going to switch those around because it doesn't matter. But I'm going to write my answers like this. I'm going to write my minus 5 first, and then my square root of 17 second. I'm going to write it like that. Okay? So from here on out, you'll see my answers look like this, but the answers your calculator gives you look like this. They're the same thing. So you have a positive 17 squared, and you have a negative 5, and so I just switch those around. And you may be, again, you're probably wondering, why is he doing this? It's because everywhere else in mathematics, you're going to see it written like this. I wished your calculator outputted it like this, but it doesn't. It outputs like that. So just know that. So that's one of my answers. There's two. Remember, one of them involves a plus sign. One of them involves a minus sign. There's two different answers. And so I want to type it in my calculator again, but instead of a plus sign, I'm going to do a minus sign. And in fact, I can just scroll up, and when I get to the problem, hit enter, and it allows me to edit. So I'm just going to scroll over. I'm going to keep scrolling over until I get to that plus sign, and I'm going to change that plus sign to a minus. And then I'm going to hit enter because now I'm doing the same problem again but with a minus in front. And this is what the calculator gives me. It says negative square root of 17 minus 5 all over 2. That's what the calculator gives me. I'm going to switch these two. Again, for now on, I'm going to write the answer. I'm going to put the negative 5 first and then put the minus square root of 7 second. Square root of 17. And then put it all over 2. So these are the answers I'm going to write from here on out on all your homework. Every time we do notes, I'm going to write it like this. Your calculator will give you these, and they're not wrong, but just know I will write it like this from now on. So those are the two answers. That's how you use the quadratic formula. Okay? We're going to do one more example together, and then I'm going to let you loose and let you do some of the problems on your own. Okay? So, yeah, so if you could go ahead and pause this video. Somebody go up to the board and pause the video, and you're going to pass out the first day's worksheet. It's going to look like this. It's going to say, solving using the quadratic formula, solve for x. And so I'm going to give you a second to pass that out, and then I'm going to start going over some of the problems. Alright. Everybody should have their papers passed out, so let me clear off my desk and make mine look like yours. So this is the front of your worksheet. This is today's worksheet. And this is the first problem. And so we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. First problem, first thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and find your A, your B, and your C. So A equals, B equals, and C equals. So what does our A equal? Well, our A is going to equal the number in front of x squared. So A equals 6. Our B is going to equal the number in front of x. Our B is 4. Our C is going to equal the constant all by itself. And some of y'all may say 2, but in reality it's negative 2. You got to keep the sign in front. So our C is negative 2. Now I'm going to plug those into our quadratic formula. So remember, our quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now I always like to put parentheses around my variables, especially over here. That's a good habit. Just trust me, it saves on a lot of computational errors when you're typing in a calculator. So I'm going to substitute those in. So that's x equals the opposite of b. Well, b is 4, so the opposite of b is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 4 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And now I'm going to type that into my calculator. Okay. So I'm going to hit the fraction button first. Say negative 4. I'm going to do, again, there are two problems here. You have the plus and the minus. I'm going to type in the plus first, get the answer, go back, change it to a minus, and get the other answer. There are two separate problems here. So I'm going to do negative 4 plus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 2. Notice as I typed it in, I used parentheses everywhere I saw parentheses. Make sure that my calculator looks just like my paper. Then I'm going to hit the down arrow, and at the bottom is going to be 2 times 6. I'm going to hit enter. Oh, nice. This is one of those problems where you get a nice fraction, no square roots left. And so the answer is, one of the answers is simply 1/3. So I would say that x equals 1/3. That's my plus answer. And I'm going to have a minus answer also. So when I type it in my calculator, I'm going to go up and change this plus sign to a minus sign. So I'm just going to hit up twice. When it highlights the problem, I hit enter. And that's going to allow me to go over and edit any part of the problem I want. That's so I don't have to retype it in every single time. Instead, I'm just going to change that to a minus, hit enter, and I get negative 1. So you have two answers. X equals 1/3 and x equals a negative 1. You have the plus answer and you have the minus answer. Okay? We're going to actually do some more examples. I think we're going to pretty much fill up today's class with examples and then let you do 1 or 2. You really can't do these at home unless you have the calculator, so you may not have a lot to do at home. We may just do a lot of examples in class and you have no homework tonight. And then tomorrow you'll just kind of pick up a worksheet and begin practicing. Okay, so let's continue on. So pause the video at any point if you feel like I'm going too fast. And just a reminder, these videos can be found online. So if you feel like you're not getting it or you would like to see it again, please go online and watch the video again. Okay, so take this equation. You look at this and you think, hold on now, it doesn't look like all the equations we've done. It certainly doesn't look like this. This is our standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Notice it equals 0. That's important. Announcements. Perfect.
Just wanted to let you know if you reserve pizza tonight with Mr. Beatty, please stop by the media center. The pizza is here, it's hot and
Awesome. So we need this equation to look like this. Before we can even begin to put it in the quadratic formula, we need to change this equation around. Do not get worried, it's very easy. All we're going to do is take things and move them across the equal sign. And when you do that, you change the sign of that particular term. So for example, I want it to equal 0. So I need to move this guy, and I need to move this guy. I need to move both of those to the other side of the equal sign. So I need to move them over here. Okay, and then there'll be nothing left over here, so then it would actually equal 0. When you move anything across the equal sign, you change its sign. So here's my equal sign. My 3x squared was already over here, so I don't have to do anything to it. It was already on this side of the equal sign. But when I move my 6x over to the side, it's going to change sign from a positive 6x to a negative 6x. And when I move my negative 2 over here, it's going to change from a negative 2 to a positive 2. And since there's nothing left over here once I move them both, I put a 0. Okay, so I took some time. I moved these guys over here. They changed sign, and now my problem looks like this standard form. So now I can begin to say what's my A, what's my B, what's my C. And so we're looking at this real quick. I'm sure you can figure out A, B, and C. A is the number in front of your x squared, so A is 3. B is the number in front of your x, so B is negative 6. And C is a constant by itself, C is positive 2. Okay? Now I'm going to plug these into my quadratic equation. I really don't feel like writing the quadratic equation down every time. I'm just simply going to plug them in. And so what I have is I'm going to end up having x equals the opposite of b. Well, b is negative 6, so the opposite of b will be positive 6. Okay, see what I'm talking about? Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c. Please use these parentheses, they're important. All over 2 times a. Okay? So that, we're going to take that right there, we're going to type in our calculator. There are two, this becomes really two different problems. You have the plus problem and the minus problem. Again, this tells us that this is really two problems in one. So I'm going to type this in my calculator. I'm going to let y'all watch me do that. So, turn my calculator on. I'm going to hit the fraction button first. Always the fraction button first. I'm going to do 6. I'm going to do the plus problem first. So 6 plus the square root, parentheses, negative 6, close that, square it, minus 4, a 3, and a 2. So take your time, make sure that what you typed in your calculator looks like what's on the paper. Then I'm going to go down to the bottom of the fraction and I'm going to put 2 times 3. Okay, so make sure they match. Hit enter. So one of my answers is this. However, I'm not going to write it like that. I kind of explained this to you already. So you see the square root of 3 plus 3 over 3. I'm going to write it as 3 plus the square root of 3 over 3. Okay, so that's my plus answer. Remember, you're going to have two answers. You're going to have a plus answer and a minus answer. Okay, so again, I'm going to always switch these. I do not like the way the calculator gives it to me. This is the way I normally write it. They're the same thing. So now I'm going to type it in my calculator and I'm going to get the minus option. So I'm going to hit up a couple times so I don't have to retype it. Hit enter. Scroll over until I get to that plus sign. And I'm going to change that plus sign to a minus sign. Hit enter. So that's the second answer I get. Again, I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to put this 3 out front, so that's a positive 3 out front. Then put the negative square root of 3 behind it over 3. So that's the minus answer. So these are my two answers. And that's the answer to number 2. Okay? If you have any questions, you can slow down the video, you can rewind it, you're welcome to pause it, maybe go ask Ms. McAdams across the hall. But we're going to continue to do some more examples. We have 2 more examples to do today. If the bell rings before I get through the examples, that's fine. I'm doing the examples really just for you in case you have any questions. Sometimes repetition helps. And so that's that problem. Alright, so we're going to go to number 3. So we have number 3 again. Looking at number 3, I notice it does not look like it's in standard form. If you look, this doesn't equal 0, it equals 4. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take that 4, I want to move it to the other side, and when I do that it's going to change sign. So here's my equal sign. I have 2x squared minus 2x already over there. As I move the 4 over, it's going to become a negative 4. Okay? And then what I have left over here is nothing. So I put a 0. So again, I moved this negative 4, or moved that 4 over and it became a negative 4. Now it looks like standard form. That's good, because now I can plug it into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to quickly identify my a, b, and c. My a is the number in front of x squared, that's 2. My b is the number in front of x, negative 2, don't forget the negative. And my c is the constant, negative 4. Okay? So, whoops, my bad. So I'm going to plug those into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to write x equals the opposite of b. Well, b's negative 2. So the opposite of negative 2 would be positive 2. So x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Okay? Now I'm going to type this in my calculator. So I don't, again, you see the repetition, you simply, if it's not already in standard form, you want to place it in standard form. From there, you find your a, b, and c. You plug them into the quadratic formula, and your calculator does the rest of the work for you. So I'm going to type this in so you can see what it looks like. One more time. Fraction button first. 2, I'm going to do the plus. We'll go back and do the minus in a minute. Second x squared. Making sure I'm using my parentheses. Then I check to make sure that the top matches what's on my paper. And then go down to the bottom. Finish it out. Check that again before I hit enter. Hit enter. And I find out one of my answers is 2. So that's nice. So one of my answers is my plus answer. Remember, you have a plus and you have a minus answer, according to that part there. So when I use the plus sign, x equals 2. What happens when I use the minus sign? Well, let's find out. Let's scroll over. Change that to a minus sign. Hit enter. X equals negative 1. That was a pretty problem. So x equals 2 and x equals negative 1. That's your 2 answers. And we're done. So that's problem number 3. Okay? Again, we're just going to end up taking notes today. You will not have any homework. We'll do the last problem, number 4. And then tomorrow when you come in, I'll go over it one more time and I'll give you plenty of time to practice and practice and practice. Okay? So let's look at number 4. One more time. Number 4. Again, not in standard form. Okay? Standard form dictates that I have, everything on one side, 0 on the other. So I'm looking over here and I say this is negative 3x. Well, you got to go. You got to go to the other side. I got to move you over here. And by doing that, you're going to change from a negative 3x to a positive 3x. So I put my equal sign. My x squared, my negative 1 are over here, so x squared, negative 1. I'm going to move my 3x over here. When I do, it's going to become a positive 3x. I was smart enough to also know that it goes in the middle, because your x goes in the middle. So I just moved it to the other side. It changes sign, which means I have nothing left over here. So that's a 0. Again, this negative 3x moved over here. It became a positive 3x. Now our equation's in standard form, and we can plug it into the quadratic formula. You're going to get tired of hearing that. Plug it into the quadratic formula, because that's what you're going to do for the next 4 days after today. So, without further ado, my a is 1 because it's the number in front of x squared. My b is 3. And my c is negative 1. X equals the opposite of b, so negative 3, plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Take your time. If I'm going through this fast and it takes you a little bit longer, that's okay. You simply want to make sure you're getting these 3 values into the equation in the right spot. The next part is to make sure you type in your calculator so that it looks just like your paper. Okay, so let's look at this. Fraction button first. Negative 3. I'm going to do plus to begin with. I'll go back and do the minus part later. The square root. 3 squared. Again, use your parentheses. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 1. Go down to the bottom. It's 2 times 1. This problem, I'm going to check. Does it look like what I have on my paper? Yes, it does. Hit enter. That's one of my answers. Okay? So again, we have 2 answers. We have the plus answer, and we're going to have the minus answer. So the plus answer, I end up getting this here, which I'm going to rewrite a little bit differently. I'm going to put the negative 3 out front. Okay? Listen, if you write this on your paper, I'm not going to count it wrong. If you write exactly what the calculator puts, I'm not going to count it wrong. But just trust me, when we get to about Thursday, it's going to be more important that you write it like this. Okay, so not that this is wrong, it's just going to be helpful if you write it the way I'm writing it. So I'm simply taking the negative 3 and the 13 and I'm switching their spots. Okay? Awesome. Well, I hope that comes off. Alright, good. So now I got the positive answer. Now I need to know what the answer is if I would have left that a negative, because again, plus or minus. So this is a plus. We'll do the minus. So I'm going to go up, hit enter, scroll over. It takes a little while, but it's much quicker than retyping it back into the calculator. Change that to a minus, hit enter, and I'm going to have negative 3 minus the square root of 13 over 2. That's my second answer. So those are my 2 answers. Those are the 2 values that make my equation equal 0. This is the quadratic formula. If it seems difficult, that's okay. The first time you see anything like this, it's probably going to look difficult. But we're going to continue to go over it. Tomorrow I'm going to go over it again. You're going to have practice problems to do. You can work with your neighbor tomorrow. You can have them help you. You can go online and find videos of me working out problems. So there's lots of resources to get help. And if push comes to shove, you can walk across the hall and ask Miss McAdams, and she could help you. So again, I hope you learned something today. I hope you took notes today. And yeah, so this is a quadratic formula. Until tomorrow, have a great day.